Morning, church. What a grand and glorious day. And you've already heard a sermon from Skip and had at least 3 more sermons during the music. So I hope you can tolerate this for a little bit longer. I also hope this thing is working. But, well, okay. Got to get rid of that thing. If it falls, it's okay. Well, it was May 30th, 1889, and it had been raining for several days. It was an area around Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and as the rain came down, the water in the South Forks Dam continued to rise. And eventually, it began to drip a little bit over the face of the dam, and it got more and more and more. And the problem was that was not a concrete face on that dam. It was an earthen dam. So erosion had begun. It had begun its dirty work. And as it continued, the people of Johnstown were warned. They said, there's a problem and there may be some danger, and you need to have some caution and just watch out for this. But strangely, the people were anything but cautious, because the day after May 30th is Memorial Day. And they were planning a grand parade, and they were preparing their horse-drawn floats. They didn't have cars, but they had those horse-drawn floats. People were making meals and fancy desserts, because the next day was going to be an all-day celebration for the whole town. Everyone was invited, and it was to be a big deal. And so, who could worry about a little rain at a time like that? Well, as the rain continued to fall, the dam continued to erode. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right in the middle of all of the festivities, the dam broke. It was 13 miles from Johnstown, and it sent 20,000 tons of water into the riverbed directly below it. Soon, a river 1/2 mile wide, 60 feet deep, hit Johnstown at 40 miles an hour. The destruction was devastating. Blocks of houses floated downstream, with many becoming only a pile of memories lost. Huge trees were uprooted. They did some of their own damage as they made their way down the river, but they looked like toothpicks in this torrent. Railroad boxcars floated like toys in a kid's bathtub. And the streets of Johnstown were no longer streets, but mountains of rubble. These are all pictures from there, by the way. These are actuals. These are not fakes. But even a sadder fact and a greater loss that day was that over 2,200 people lost their lives. Now, the weather was definitely a contributing factor, was it not? Yes, of course it was. But the other tragic problem was this: the people didn't pay attention to the warning signs that were all around them. This coming Thanksgiving, I will have been a Christian for 60 years. 52 of those years I spent in vocational ministry. And I can tell you, friends, that the world we live in today is not the world that I'm talking about back then. Erosion has taken place. Moral erosion has taken place. Spiritual erosion has taken place. And it starts slowly in the beginning, doesn't it? Just a few drops of water across the face of the dam. But that's all it takes to get the process going. So moral and spiritual erosion have invaded industry. Pardon me for saying it. Politics. If you're a teacher, please don't be embarrassed, but it's invaded education. Many of our young people, especially in our higher schools of learning, are being taught anything but truth. It has invaded medicine, families, churches. Every facet of society has been affected by moral erosion. And to the child of God, it shouldn't be a surprise, should it? We read about it in Scripture over and over. But perhaps we're having just too good a time to really think about it. Or maybe the busyness of life has come upon us in such a way that we think, well, there's plenty of time to deal with this later. But the fact is, there's not always a later we can count on. There wasn't in Johnstown. So the Apostle Paul sent a warning to his young convert, Timothy. And in his second letter to this young protege, Paul began to prophetically outline some very frightening things about what he calls the last days. And he began by warning us that in those times, mankind would face perilous or dangerous times. And my personal belief is that we're living in those times right now. So I want you to turn with me, if you will, to 2 Timothy chapter 3. And there we're going to observe the problem or the characteristics of the last times. Paul writes this, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self and lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful and unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous and reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And verse 5 says, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power, avoid such people. Now, he gives quite a long list of things here to think about, and obviously, I can't cover each of those in depth in one sermon, and especially since, half of it's gone already. But no. But I do want to do this. What I did is I took each of these and I broke it down into 4 sections. And in each of those sections, I'm going to focus on 1 or perhaps 2 of what's being said there. But I do want to encourage you to study this passage on your own, study it with some depth, and then understand it. Because again, our world is being affected this way right now, and we need to be alert to what it is that's happening. So in group 1, I want to focus on self-centeredness. There, Paul addresses those who are lovers of self, and I'm going to couple that with lovers of money. The world is full of people whose main love is themselves. And tragically, the church isn't off limits when it comes to things like this. Self-centered people will seldom concern themselves with the concerns of other people. It doesn't matter to them. They're the only thing that counts. Sometimes self-centered people don't even worry about the will of God, because after all, they can even be their own God. Their real desire is to get their own way, or to boost their own reputations, while attempting to control everything and everyone around them. Paul warned us in 1 Corinthians about the incestuous man, and here he issues another warning, and it's about those who are self-centered. In the late 1980s, I was associate pastor of First Baptist Church in Oceanside, California. We were right at the back gate of Camp Pendleton there. And in fact, we had a lot of Marines that were there and came to church there and came to our home, and one of them even stole our daughter away and married her. And that's why we have Allie here today. So Semper Fi, right, Allie? That's it. But there was one of the members there in the church who approached the pastor after an all-church business meeting. And by the way, I don't believe too much in those all-church business meetings. They usually just turn into messes. But they had an all-church business meeting, and a decision was made that night by the congregation that one of the men in the church didn't like. And so he confronted the pastor in the hallway right after church, and I was privy to the conversation. I happened to be in the hall at the same time. And this gentleman walked up to the pastor, and he was angry, and these were his exact words. "You do know that I'm a millionaire, don't you?" Now, what's implied in that? A lot of things are implied in that. Well, he's an important person. He's a millionaire, probably gives a lot of money to the church. And if things don't go my way, that money could be diminished quite drastically. And by the way, I'm not implying at all that all rich people are like this. I'm using this as a real example because it's a real example of a self-centered person. "So you do know that I'm a millionaire, don't you?" And the pastor replied, "Yes, I do know that you're a millionaire. And in fact, I believe that one of the reasons you have been able to accumulate so much is that you've never given a dime of it to this church." Whoa! So churches are made up of a lot of different personalities and personality types, aren't they? I mean, we're all so different, other than Skip and Chris and Byron and I. I mean, we're exactly the same. But we're made up of different people. And some years ago, I came across an article that speaks of the different types of people who attend church. Now, don't be offended by this because it's a kind of a general thing. But it was rather interesting, and he said this, that 10% of church attenders are those that he would call innovators. Innovators. These are the creative ones, the visionaries, the ones who get excited about the church, having outreach into the lives of others and touching their lives. Sometimes they're the main workers in the church. And by the way, another stat, right, Chris? About 10% of people in the church do 90% of the work. That's an old stat, but it's a true one. So they're often the workers, sometimes even the biggest givers. Proverbs 29:18 tells us this, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." So do we need visionaries in the church? Absolutely we do. Can we use more than 10%? Absolutely, we can. And again, these figures may not be tight figures, but it's a general idea, and just for our edification. We'll speak it that way. Well, he goes on to say that this will move. 80% are maintainers. Maintainers. What does that mean? Well, maintainers are often happy with the church with just the way it is, the status quo. Please don't change. When we were considering at the Journey Church what we were going to do next, I stopped by a church on a Sunday morning, and I knew that the church was running about, on a good Sunday, about 20 people. And talked to a lady there, that I knew this lady, and I talked to her and I said, I wonder if your elders would consider going in together with another church. And she looked at me so shocked and said, "Oh no, Pastor, I love our church just the way it is." And I thought, how does that fit the Great Commission? 20 people in a church and you're happy with it. There's something terribly, terribly wrong with that picture. But the status quo, the comfort, those things are more important than the kingdom of God. Well, he goes on to list the last 10% and says that these are inhibitors. Inhibitors. Those are those who tend to resist anything new, anything different. Anything new is considered unholy and unwelcome, and they know that if they like it, God must like it. And if they don't like it, God must not like it. And anyone who does not see it their way is suspect, especially the pastors. So friends, when the leaders at Cornerstone and the leaders at the Journey sat down and talked about merging, we all knew we were taking a risk. There was no question about that. We didn't know exactly what Cornerstone would bring to the table. They didn't know exactly what we were bringing to the table. And so it was a point at which pride and everything that we liked as individuals had to be set aside. It really did. It wouldn't have worked otherwise. Pastor Chris and I talked about the fact that, doctrinally, we have to be on the same page. That's extremely important. But culturally, we need to be somewhat on the same page too, because, if for instance, we'd have come together and we'd have said to Cornerstone Church, now, church music isn't church music unless it's a piano and organ. Can't have, guitars and oh my God, who ever heard of drums in a church? Well, see, if we'd have fought over those kind of things, it wouldn't have worked, would it? Wouldn't have worked at all. So we knew we were taking a risk. But I'll tell you what, I love looking and thinking about and observing the connections that are being made all the time. New connections. And I think it's a marvelous thing. And I mentioned this way back in the beginning, but you've probably forgotten it because it wasn't a joke. But I love the fact that the message that we sent out to the world was different than that of the church split. This was churches coming together for the sake of the gospel. And, is it perfect? If you find a perfect church, please don't join it. You will ruin it. Well, the group number 2 has more to do with relationships and attitudes. I think my battery is getting low. Those who are proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, and unholy. Have you ever noticed that the school bully is one who's filled with pride. Life, again, is about them. It largely fits the self-love motif. But what does the Bible say about pride? Well, it's no mistake that the love chapter of 1 Corinthians says love does not boast. It's no mistake that in Proverbs chapter 6, it begins with the things that God hates and starts with a proud look. I somehow got way ahead here. So this last summer, now you ladies know this, and some of your husbands, if you've listened, you will know too, but they studied from a book by Jerry Bridges, and he used the Beatitudes as a platform for a study in humility. And the Beatitudes reveal the attitudes that we have. Someone has said that the Beatitudes are the attitudes of being. It's who we are, what we think, so forth. And we see that the Beatitudes reveal attitudes that lead to happiness and to joy. We see that there are attitudes that please God, and an attitude of pride and its second cousins, arrogance and abusiveness, are not pleasing to God, and they don't bring joy to the person who treats others that way. I think it's helpful when we can recognize that we have a bad attitude about something, because when we recognize that, we can repent. We can turn to God, turn our minds away from that attitude and confess it for what it is, and then ask God to help us to live right. Remember, God always resists the proud, and he always gives grace to the humble. So, Paul also talks here about disobedience to parents, and I bring this up too because it's a kind of a current trend in our society. Have you heard of youth takeovers? Well, it's happening a lot. Over the July 4th holiday, thousands of teens descended onto Newport Beach. There were hundreds of fist fights. There was a takeover of a large department store in that area. And after they took it over, they left it with empty shelves, and the store was in utter destruction. Over 400 youth were arrested in that event. And these so-called youth takeovers are being repeated across our nation. Since then, they have started street takeovers, where they park hundreds of cars in the streets to block the police officers from getting in and block the way so that their friends can do illegal burnouts and stuff in the middle of the streets. And so, how does this happen and where does it come from? Well, I think there's several problems with that. One is, again, our youth essentially are being taught that they are entitled, that they should have anything that they want. It's not all of them, I know, and not all of them fall into that trap, but many have fallen into that trap of thinking, if you possess something that I want, I should just take it and there should be no question. We hear about entitlements in a lot of different ways, and I'm not going to go into all of those. But you have to pay for this for me, and you have to pay for this for me. You have to pay for that for me. I think another problem is that our young people see so much corruption in high places. They see government officials cheating and lying and accusing others wrongly and slandering and so forth. Many of them see their own parents lying and cheating their way through life. One of my brothers had 8 children, and if one of them was to lie to him, he'd likely knock them across the room. And yet, if a police officer was to come to the door to serve a warrant, he would say, "Tell them I'm not here." So the kids could lie, the father could lie, the parents could lie, but not the kids. Well, how does that go over? Not too well. So they need to see consistency and stuff in the adults. And so hard work and honesty are no longer the hallmarks of society. Instead, people, again, see themselves as entitled. Now, this is based on something, and you may think that I'm being political here. Number one, I don't think there's anything wrong in speaking against politics when politics is crooked. But secondly, it's not a political issue, it's a spiritual issue. And it takes me all the way back to, I don't know if I was in the 3rd or the 4th grade. I was 8 or 9 years old. And you know what was reading material for us in that 3rd or 4th grade class? The Communist Manifesto. Why would a teacher have students in the 3rd or 4th grade read the Communist Manifesto? Because she wanted us to understand that the basic principle behind communism was that they were going to take over our country within 50 years without firing a shot. And she was warning us. She was teaching us, this is how you have to stand up for your nation, and you have to love your nation and be a part of things. Now, they didn't accomplish that, did they? But, not in 50 years, but they're getting closer and closer. They're getting closer and closer. Listen to what Nikita Khrushchev said when I was 13. 13 years old, I heard this. Your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we will keep feeding you small doses of socialism. Please listen to that. Until you finally wake up and find out you already have communism. We will not have to fight you. Say, don't have to fire a shot. We don't have to fight you. We will so weaken your economy, you will fall like overripe fruit into our hands. And so, friends, in order for our nation to fail and for communism to succeed, all that needs to happen is to take away from those who are willing to work and give it to those who are not. And we're there. We're there. 24 years ago, Barbara and I were in Moscow, Russia. Okay? We spent 10 days in Moscow. I was teaching a group of young ministerial students there, pastoral counseling, and actually taught a full semester's material in 10 days. It was 5 hours a day, so we taught 50 hours in that week. But it was really interesting because they had an orientation for us at the very beginning. And in the orientation, they said this: when you're riding the subway, do not smile. Because if you smile, they will know you're not Russian, and your life will be in danger. This is a picture from a Russian subway. I hope you can see it, but there's not a smile there. What more do we need to hear about the failure of communism than you dare not smile? There's plenty more we could talk about, but I think that covers it for now. I did want to say one more thing. Do you know the difference between socialism and communism? In communism, it's forced upon you by tyrannical leaders. In socialism, it's voted on by people who are too stupid to know it's the same thing. Excuse me for saying that, but that's the way it is. They are exactly the same thing. They have the same goals. Take from, it's the Robin Hood philosophy. Take from the rich, give to the poor, tax, tax, tax. Enough of that. Group 3, the English Standard Version says that the people will be heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, and filled with deceit. Now again, some of these deal more with attitudes, while others deal with human relationships and behavior, but none of them are favorable. Here, the ESV uses the word heartless as a starting word. Other translations use the words without natural affection. And for today's message, I'm choosing to use the without natural affection and to ask this question. What can be with more without natural affection than purposely taking the life of our own unborn child? Now we can go back to the other one. It's heartless. It's heartless. I tried to research how many abortions are provided each month by Planned Parenthood, and I did a lot of online research, and you know what figure I found? None. They won't report it anymore. They don't want you to know. They don't want me to know. But I did find that in years past, when they were still reporting it, at that point in time, they were doing 33,000 abortions every month. That is 400,000 a year. Now, California has passed a bill legalizing infanticide up to 28 days after an aborted child is born alive. What is infanticide? That's the killing of an infant. So if the child is aborted and born alive, doctors can legally take that life up to 28 days after it's born. What is more heartless? What is further from natural affection than that? Folks, this is nothing more than child sacrifice. And sadly, even though we're told it's not so, many of our tax dollars are supporting it. Then, of course, there are other ways that parents abuse their children. Sometimes they neglect them, physically abuse them, even killing their own children. All of these reflections of a lack of natural affection. The writer Paul goes on to say they are unappeasable, slanderous, and without self-control. And if you follow politics at all, you know that there's a lot of slander going on now and a lack of self-control. So Paul's description of the world really is reflected. And by the way, Caleb mentioned this just yesterday, not knowing that it was in my message notes today. But it was interesting to hear him use this passage. There was no king in Israel in those days. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Friends, if we all have the right to decide what is right, what does that make us? God. Because he's the only one that decides what is right and what is wrong. We have to go by what he says, not by what we think. In group 4, there's lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Having an appearance of, I did it again. having an appearance of godliness while denying its power. And then he goes on to say, avoid such people. So here Paul is warning us that in the last days, many are going to seek positions of influence in our lives, some in our churches, and they're people who will have an appearance of godliness while actually denying God's power. So we've gone through a litany of bad behaviors and bad attitudes, and again, I would encourage you to go back and study this passage on your own. But I hate to leave us in this position. I mean, this has been a downer, hasn't it? Oh, So let's think a little bit beyond that and think about the solution. Realize, friends, there is hope. There is hope. Jeremiah declared, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call upon me, and you will come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Now, I'm a believer in context, and I understand the context here. Jeremiah was clearly writing to exiled Jews. That was the promise to them. However, the principle still applies. God is a God of hope. Can I say it again? God is a God of hope. He's a God of second chances. And I often hear Pastor Chris say, and third, and fourth, right? He's a God of the second chance. He is the God of new beginnings. He is the God of hope. Through him, all things are possible. And if all things are possible through God, then he's a God of hope. So while it's true that godlessness seems to be running rampant all around us, have you seen any of the postings of thousands of young people being baptized in the ocean and here and there? There are thousands and thousands of young people coming to Christ every month, and that should give us hope. Though it is underground, China boasts of one of the largest churches in the world. Many underground Christians in China. It's also reported that there are huge numbers of Muslims coming to Christ every month. So, friends, God is still at work in our world. He hasn't quit. He hasn't given up. He hasn't washed his hands of us. And our world can change. But let me say this. It has to change one person at a time, one family at a time, one church at a time. So it might be up to you individually to be the one who sparks some of that. It may be this church that sparks some of that. We don't know those things, but we need to try. And then we read in Romans 12:2, the Apostle Paul also there says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We don't want to be a part of the world system as we see it. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you may prove what is the good and the acceptable and perfect will of God. And I like to point this out. God here does not say, by a renewed mind. A renewed mind is a leap. We go from here to there. And that does happen, by the way. But he also talks about the fact that we have to have a renewing of the mind. That's an ongoing process. It's happening all the time. And do you know how long it's going to take to accomplish that? Your whole life. But be encouraged also by these words in Philippians, also by Paul. But he who began a good work in us will complete it. Doesn't say he might. There's a chance that he will. No. He will complete it. May God add his blessing to his word. And thank you, Pastor Chris, for giving me the opportunity.